Gusto na προχωρήσω.
Ναι.
Καλησπέρα σας. Good evening, everyone. Let me start by respectfully acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Welcome to tonight's online seminar, which was delivered by Dr. Eleni Kyramargiou on refugees of the 1923 population exchange in Greece, efforts for integration and assimilation. And we'd also like to thank our sponsor, Emmanuel Heretakis. As most of you are aware, this is the final seminar for the year. Tonight's seminar brings the 2022 program to its conclusion. It's been an exhaustive year, it's been a challenging year, but it's also been a very rewarding year. The breadth of topics covered and the range and caliber of speakers that were able to participate has made this quite a unique program, with very few, if any, global equivalents. For this, we'd like to thank you. We'd like to thank the audience. We'd like to thank you for your participation, for your support, for your engagement. We're still at the tail end of COVID. We will endeavour to have more seminars at the mezzanine level of the Greek Centre next year to bring back that human interaction, that social engagement that we've all missed out on. But on the online component, this is also here to stay, as it's given us a greater global reach in terms of topic and theme choices, but also the range of speakers from every corner of the globe. For this seminar series to be executed on a regular weekly basis over a 6-7 month period with very few technical glitches, it can only happen if there's a lot of work behind the scenes and before the lead up to the live event. There are many people that have contributed in making this year's seminar series a success. Firstly, I'd like to thank our IT wizard and troubleshooter, the extraordinaire Kostas Avlonitis. He's a bit like those faceless dentists in commercials. You rarely see their faces, but delivery and execution is impossible without them. Thank you, Costa. I'd like to thank my fellow board member, Spiridoula Dimitriou, who's assisted in the MC duties and has stepped up in my shoes when I've been absent, to Mary Rakis for helping us with the seminars that took place at the Greek Centre, to Stavro Messini and Esteni Kopeludi for their press releases, to the local Greek media, both print and radio, for promoting the seminars and interviewing many of the presenters. A special thank to all our sponsors, both individual sponsors and our corporate sponsors. We as a community organisation, we rely on all donations assist our cash flow to maintain program delivery. May also send out a short survey and look out for it. We're keen to get your feedback. And next year's program is already in the planning, and we hope to have released it by the end of November. This might be the last seminar for 2022, but October will be a blockbuster month for the community with 2 festivals on. The film festival starts tomorrow night with the film Left to Hear, showing both at the Astor and Coma theatres, and it ends at the end of October with us meeting my beloved. We also have the Antipodes Street Festival on the weekend of the 22nd and 23rd of October. We'd like to see you at as many events as possible. All the details you'll find online. And just a reminder for those that will have any questions during our Q&A interval, simply submit them to the chat or comment section on Facebook or YouTube. Let's return to tonight's seminar. Most of you should now be aware of events in Asia Minor in the early 1920s, which is followed by population exchanges under the Treaty of Lausanne. Over 1.2 million refugees descended on what was then metropolitan Greece with a population of 5 to 5.5 million. A Greek state, which is financially anemic, massively under-resourced from every perspective, had been entrusted with the task of absorbing and resettling these new rivals. That's all I will say about the topic, as Dr. Spiridoula Dimitriou has a task of introducing and expanding upon both the topic and the speaker tonight. Spiz, I'll pass on the baton to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Tonight I have the great
pleasure of introducing Dr. Eleni Kyramargiou to you tonight, and also to thank her for participating in the seminar series and for her presentation on the topic of the refugees of the 23 population exchange in Greece. Dr. Eleni Kyramargiou gained her PhD in contemporary history from the University of the Aegean. Her dissertation was on the residential and social composition of the settlement of Trapezzona from 1922 to 1967. Trapezzona is a region in Piraeus, which also happens to be Dr. Kyramargiou's birthplace. The area experienced a large population increase after the Greek campaign in Asia Minor collapsed under the Turkish assault in September of 1922. Dr. Kyramargiou's research illustrates that economic, cultural, and social history is strongly connected to political history. Dr. Kyramargiou is currently an associate researcher of the Institute of Historical Research with the National Hellenic Research Foundation, which is one of the largest research centres in Greece. She has worked on research projects supported by organisations including the Institute of Mediterranean Studies and the Cultural Foundation of the National Bank of Greece. Dr. Kyramargiou is currently the principal researcher of the project titled 100 Memories, 2020 to 2023, which focuses on the memories and legacies of the population exchange and refugee settlement in Greece. She has published in many academic and non-academic journals. Her book, based on her research on the economic and urban development of Trapezzona, was published in 2019 by the Hellenic Research Foundation. The Asia Minor catastrophe, as it became known in Greek culture, caused a huge humanitarian calamity. Under the pressure that this created, Greece and Turkey in January 1923 bilaterally decided to permanently resolve the issues caused by the existence of minority populations in their respective territories, with both countries aiming to promote interior security and stability. The strains placed on Greek society by the arrival of around 1 million refugees who were forced to abandon their homes in the Ottoman Empire and the difficulty of their adjustment to a new environment have been discussed by historians mainly in the context of the impact that the crime caused, its impact on social cohesion. Dr. Kyramargiou's presentation tonight discusses the efforts for integration and assimilation of the refugee population. The focus of her talk will be the policies of social integration and more particularly their implementation in urban and rural areas and the multiple ways the departure of Muslims from Greece created ample space for the process of Hellenization and the pivotal importance of refugee settlements in forging a different social and demographic map of Greece. I now welcome Dr. Kyramargiou to take over your screen.
Good morning, and for me, it's a great pleasure for me to be with you tonight or today. Thank you, the Greek community of Melbourne, for the invitation, and especially Nick Dallas. I will try to present you today a new research project that I work on it at this moment. I'm in the first steps of my research, so I have more questions than answers, but I think that it will be interesting, not only for you, but also for me to hear your comments, your thoughts. So let's start. In 1924, a few months before the construction of the first houses erected by the Refugee Rehabilitation Commission in Nea Kokkinia of Piraeus was to be completed, around 1,000 refugees were moved from the Phaleron public bath to large hospital tents near the unfinished settlement. The refugees themselves did not want to move away from a warm building with plenty of easily available water to Nea Kokinia, an area they knew to be desolate wasteland. I have a presentation, yes. The construction of the houses was soon completed, but there were delays in the distribution by the Commission. As the winter was getting closer, the refugees living in the tents attempt to find a solution that would ensure the houses will be distributed on time, but the efforts were in vain. One night, during a heavy storm, they broke into the houses and occupied them. This event is commonly reproduced in the relevant Greek literature without, however, answering the following questions. Were the refugees moved there because they would eventually live in the houses after the construction was completed? And if so, how would that happen? Had they already bought the houses? What it just hope on behalf of the refugees that they would get the houses simply because they were moved to an adjacent area. After occupying them, did the refugees manage to keep the houses? We can go to the second slide. Oh, okay, thank you. At this point, I have no answer to these questions, and I have not managed to find any in the sources reporting this event. The reason why I decided to start my presentation with this story is because I find it indicative of the prevailing condition at the time of the historiographical questions that arise and of the circumstances that need to be investigated. Today, I will be attempt to establish a framework that describes the turbulent period and discuss a series of questions on the dominant role of the state in addressing the refugee issue in Greece between 1922 and 1928, focusing on the refugee settlement of Nea Kokinia. My current research objective is to approach the establishment of the organized refugee settlement of Nea Kokinia, the people who live there and the profession they practice, through the lens of the international decisions, loan-taking policies and general strategies that were shaping the wider world at this time. Since my research is still in its infancy, I can mostly share questions and thoughts rather than conclusions and certainties. Let's see the events. The military defeat. On August 25th, 1922, the Greek army suffered a devastating defeat in Afyon-Karahisar in Western Asia Minor. The defeat marked the end of the Greco-Turkish War of 1999 to 1922. During the withdrawal of the Greek army, the Greek-speaking Christian population of many Asia Minor areas abandoned their homes and lands in fear of retaliation by the Turkish army. The arrival in Greece. East Aegean Islands might have been the first stop for this refugee population, but all Greek ports received thousands of refugees. Just the port of Piraeus, the country's largest port, received more than 40,000 refugees in only 1 month, September 1922, and refugees flows continued unabated throughout the autumn and winter of 1922. The signing of the Treaty of Lausanne and the Population Exchange Agreement in January 1923 set a new regulatory framework that would manage refugee movement. First state efforts. The government, in cooperation with the king, had to provide care not only for the 150,000 refugees who had already reached Greece, but also for the thousands who were headed for the Greek ports. The first refugee relief measures included providing food rations, decongesting the port by moving refugees to makeshift settlements in the mainland, requisitioning public and private buildings to provide housing to the most vulnerable, and organizing a Mahellenic charity fundraiser. The government requested aid from the International Red Cross, international charity organizations, and European governments. The aid, in the form of provisions, bedding ration distribution, and the establishment of makeshift settlements and hospitals, started at the end of October 1922. The government requested aid from the The majority of these refugees had not managed to salvage their assets and transport them to Greece, while even those who might have had the ability to cover their accommodation expenses and secure decent dwellings were not initially able to implement individual settlement and housing strategies due to absence of options and alternatives. Since the end of August 1922, the Ministry of Welfare, in collaboration with the other ministries, had been trying to coordinate the transport, settlement and care of refugees throughout the country. Due to the constant population inflows, the open-air refugee camps would either quickly refill after their previous inhabitants had been moved to building interiors or temporary dwellings, or would expand as the newly arrived crowded next to older inhabitants. The everyday life of the native population was disrupted, mainly due to the house requisitions and the daily coexistence with the refugees. On November 3, 1922, the Ministry of Welfare passed a law establishing the Refugee Relief Fund, highlighting the necessity of finding a long-term solution to the problem of refugee housing at the highest political level. Establishing an independent entity which would develop a comprehensive rehabilitation plan appeared to be the best course of action. The fund was run by a 10-member committee under the supervision of the Ministry of Welfare and aimed to manage and distribute the funds raised towards refugee welfare and rehabilitation through charity, fundraisers, bequests, donations and endowments. The decision to establish the fund and explore solutions to the refugee housing problem that would prove more permanent than house requisition stemmed from the political admissions that the refugees would remain in Greece and would not return to Asia Minor. The fund operated from November 1922 to May 1925 and constructed 6,500 dwellings, around 4,500 of which were in Athens and Piraeus, built on land owned and expropriated by the state. In Nea Kokinia, the fund erected the first wooden houses of the refugee settlement. We can see in the slides the cadastral of the refugee settlement. The first houses that created for the fund are these blocks, only these blocks. All the other cadastral show us the refugee settlement established by the Refugee Rehabilitation Committee. And this is it's the first refugee settlement of Nea Kokinia. The four different neighborhoods that the Refugee Rehabilitation Committee built between 1924 to 1928. The ministry dissolved the fund after the establishment of the Refugee Rehabilitation Committee, which then took on the enormous task of refugee rehabilitation. The Commission was an independent entity which was funded on the basis of the Geneva Protocol of September 1923 under the supervision of the League of Nations and with the contribution of the Greek state. It was managed by a four-member committee and had at its disposal the exchangeable Muslim assets, monastic and public lands, and farms expropriated after the previous agricultural reform, as well as two refugee loans taken out by the Greek government in 1924 and 1928. In the cities, the Commission implemented a multi-phase housing scheme. Within rural areas, it focused on the housing and professional rehabilitation of refugees. In Athens and Piraeus, the Commission established four refugee settlements, one of them being Nea Kokinia in Piraeus. The rest were in the settlement of Vironas, the refugee settlement of Kessariani, and the refugee settlement of Nea Ionia. One of the first tasks of the Refugee Relief Fund at the beginning of 1923 was to conduct a land survey on the northern edge of the municipality of Piraeus, in the area along the Kanapitseri ravine, which would a few years later become the southern part of the municipality of Nea Kokinia. The first foundations were laid on June 18, 1923, marking the creation of the first organized housing settlement of Nea Kokinia. Soon after, the first dwellings were ready. This first settlement was made up of 36 blocks, with each block containing 8 to 25 square meter houses, depending on block size. In every house, there were at least 2 rooms housing one family each. Of course, refugees also kept living in makeshift dwellings next to the fund-constructed one, with more hastily erected shacks being added all the time as more refugees arrived. From 1924 and for the following 5 years, the Refugee Rehabilitation Commission undertook the systematic urban planning of the area, implementing a housing scheme in consecutive stages. The first stage, between 1924 to 1926, included about 75 hectares of land, and the settlement started expanding in an organized way to the north, covering a surface of 1.5 square kilometers. This expanse of land was conceptually divided into 3 neighborhoods known by the name of their respective churches: Άγιος Νικόλαος, Οσία Ξένη, and Άγιος Γεώργιος. The single or double-story dwellings that were constructed had tile roofs, an internal yard, a shared bathroom, and a laundry room. The plots were divided perpendicularly to the street, thus allowing all properties to have a street facade and leaving open spaces inside every block that the homeowners could later use to expand their houses. As we read in the commemorative Refugee Review of 1925 by that time, a miracle of aesthetics, urban planning, and sanitation had taken place in Kokkinia. For 42,000 refugees from Asia Minor and the colossal settlement, behemoth of patience, expense, and technical oversight had been established. The figures confirm this statement. The fund and the commission had spent 50 million drachmas for the construction of 1,150 dwellings with 7,850 rooms, which had already been delivered to their owners, all refugees from Asia Minor and Pontus. The task was accomplished through the labor of 3,408 refugees, 759 of whom were women. The engineer, Dionysios Kokkinos, was the project's technical director since its initial stage, when it was under the supervision of the fund, through to its completion under the commission. His name became inextricably linked with the technical and financial aspects of the project, the issues it faced, as well as its eventual success. In 1927, the Commission conducted a new topographical survey north of the neighborhood of Agios Georgios. An area of more than 8 hectares was divided into 32 blocks of the same size, measuring 50 by 35 meters each. However, the houses that were erected were not of the same quality as the previous one. They reflected the Commission's limited fund and the fact that they prioritized rural settlements. The blocks were separated from each other with 10-meter lanes, which comprised the road network. Each block was divided into 20 plots of land, on which 10 prefabricated wooden houses were erected. The buildings included 2 identical dwellings under one roof made of asbestos, which covered both plots. This neighborhood was named Krini, after the coast district of Smyrna of the same name, now called Chesme, but even today it's still known by the name Germanica. Germanica was the Commission's last project in Nea Kokkinia. In parallel with the work of the Commission, the Ministry of Welfare implemented another scheme which ceded land to the exchangeable refugees, a scheme that continued over the following decades. The rehabilitation of the entirety of the refugee population in Nea Kokkinia was completed at the end of the 1950s. At that time, internal migrants arriving from rural areas at the islands were also becoming integrated in the population of Nea Kokkinia. The Commission attempted to facilitate the professional rehabilitation of urban refugees, mainly through granting lodge and sitting land for the purpose of establishing businesses, most manufacturing units. In 1925, in Nea Kokkinia, there were 8 carpet manufacturers, 2 fabric manufacturers, 1 needle company, 2 crate manufacturers, and various other companies making sweets, wedding candy, wedding wreaths, and candles. More than 3,000 refugees worked at this unit, the majority of whom were women. A large number of refugees also worked at the small and large factories of the industrial zone, which had expanded since the arrival of the refugees. Finally, many refugees of both genders opened small shops, often using the front part of their refugee houses, or became traveling salespeople. The American Women's Hospital Organization was not only the most significant charity organization active in the settlement, but its contribution was also the most long-standing. At the behest of the President of the Commission, Henry Mokredau, Dr. Ruth Palmeret moved the headquarters of the American Women's Hospital from Thessaloniki to Nea Kokkinia. Her vision for a general clinic and a modern nursing school was realized in Block 49 of the settlement. On the hospital of Kokkinia, Dr. Ruth said, "It opened in December 1922 to provide care for refugees. In 1924, it moved from a wooden hovel to one of the mud sacks that had been made for the refugees. The facade of the hospital has no decorative elements. The general clinic offered home medical services, an emergency room, nursing and surgical services, breastfeeding station, and a maternity and fetal clinic. In 1925, it had only one doctor for all medical, surgical, and obstetric services, and one eye doctor. 5 years later, it had 4 doctors, 1 nurse, and a capacity of 105 beds. Over the course of a decade, the clinic became a general hospital through addition and expansion. In 1934, it had 60 beds. In 1935, hospital ownership was transferred to the newly established municipality of Nea Kokkinia under the name Refugee Hospital of Nea Kokkinia, American Women's Hospital, and it was run by a 7-member executive committee. A year later, the American Women's Hospital Organization concluded its charity activities in Greece and withdrew from the country. The 4 main actors who created in Nea Kokkinia settlement that miracle of aesthetics, urban planning and sanitation were the Greek state, represented mainly by the Ministry of Welfare, the Refugee Relief Fund, initially succeeded by the Refugee Rehabilitation Commission, and the American Women's Hospital Organization. I felt that it was necessary to provide a comprehensive overview of the circumstances under which the settlement was established and the entities that were involved before we moved to the next analytical level, examining briefly the settlement policies in conjunction with the integration and assimilation policies which were dominant at the time, as well as the global issues of the area. The arrival of the refugees in Greece is not an isolated phenomenon, but instead the result of a military conflict taking place during a period when such conflicts were constant in Europe, as the continent was experiencing the end of empires and the emergence of nation-states. Within this context, the Greek state, which at that exact time was shaping its new borders, taking what is essentially its present form, treated refugees as a population group with characteristics that favored and facilitate permanent settlement and attempt to manage the task of this settlement. This is the reason why the state opted for long-term housing policies. It established settlement which would later evolve into the Greek cities of today as they expanded outwards surrounding the urban centers of the time. Political instability and economic crisis in combination with the arrival of an enormous number of refugees brought international institutions and aid organizations to Greece, leading to the establishment of the Refugee Rehabilitation Commission and the arrangement of 2 loans for the purpose of rehabilitation. The refugees who settled in the 4 urban settlements established by the Commission, Νέα Κοκκινιά, Νέα Ιωνία, Βύρωνας and Κεσαριανή, shared similar socio-economic characteristics, and other selection was largely random. Their professional profile was also similar, as well as their professional trajectories, especially during the first period of the settlement process. Since my time today is limited and my research is still in its initial stages, I will jump forward to the years 1928 to 1930 so that we can look at the evolution of the settlement at the time of the census and parliamentary elections. By 1928, the Commission's initial housing settlement in Νέα Κοκκινιά had been almost completed. The entire settlement had access to water and electricity lighting around the settlement. There were still makeshift shacks as well as more organized refugee camps. While in its northern part, the process of urban planning was still ongoing. The official census recorded that the population of the settlement numbered 33,201 people, 15,000 were men and 17,000 were women. Of those, 30,301 were refugees who had come to Greece after September 1922. And 28,969 of them were enrolled in the local population registers. In the parliamentary elections of 1928, 4,625 men voted in the settlement of Νέα Κοκκινιά. 98% of them voted for the Liberal Party led by Eleftherios Venizelos, 1.1 for the Conservatives, and 0.7 for the Communist Party, confirming the fact that the refugees overwhelmingly supported the party of Venizelos and denounced the Conservatives, especially during the first years after their arrival. As we can see also, the picture was similar both in the previous and in the following elections. Competition for a job was so fierce that it left a little room for negotiation on contractual terms and labor conditions. Those refugees who choose to become self-employed without the corresponding financial background either turned part of their dwellings into coffee shops, grocery stores, or corner stores, or went into sales, setting up makeshift stalls in central market, or becoming traveling salespeople. According to the Pirsos Professional Guide in 1930, 612 different businesses were operating in the settlement, most of them one-person businesses. It is noteworthy that there were 37 bakeries, 39 barber shops, 65 coffee shops, and 95 grocery stores, reflecting the large number of small businesses operating in the settlement, since they could be set up with minimal capital and secure enough income to guarantee the survival of the owners and their families. There has been extensive discussion in Greek historiography as to the prioritization of refugees and the ambitious plan for its prevention. In rural areas, this was accomplished by granting the refugees land ownership through the distribution of the Ottoman assets. In the cities, proletarialization was prevented by granting loans which allowed the opening of stores, workshops, and small businesses. However, the number of those loans was limited and certainly did not influence the vast majority of the urban refugee population who lived in makeshift or even organized camps. As a result, whether through labor or the absence of property and access to financial benefits, a refugee proletariat was eventually established and it gradually turned to more radical political solutions. In Nikia, home ownership, even when not accompanied by other financial benefits, led to a more balanced political attitude, at least during the interwar period, and a more systematic study of the social and professional profile of its residents, in parallel with their political behavior, could possibly yield interesting results and highlight different aspects of this relationship. By calculating and evaluating a variety of contributing factors and by prioritizing stability and balance as their common goal, the Greek state and the international institutions which practiced in the rehabilitation project succeeded in safeguarding a certain level of order in the urban centers, even though, at least at first, they did not implement a comprehensive rehabilitation scheme for the majority of the refugees. They still managed to maintain control over the situation. The Greek state, mainly through the Ministry of Welfare, was able to emerge as the leading refugee rehabilitation entity until the end of the 1960s, when the process of the urban housing rehabilitation of refugees was finally completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleni. Thank you for that presentation. It's a massive topic, and I know you've given us sort of one perspective, but there's so many ways to approach it because there are so many dimensions to the Asian minor issue. We've asked for questions from our audience, but I might just kickstart the questioning. When the exchange started, when the refugees were arriving in Piraeus, I mean, some went to urban areas, some were settled in rural areas because there would have been Muslim refugees that had left as well. When was the assessment made where they'll be sent to? Before they left Asia Minor or when they arrived in Piraeus in the first week? The assessment was made by authorities there. So when the refugees arrived in Piraeus, did they know where they're going to be resettled, which part of Greece, or they only found out along the way?
The refugee. Thank you for the questions, and I hope to have a great conversation now after my monologue. The first ship arrived in 30 of August of 1922 with more than 3,000 refugees and a lot of soldiers, a lot of a part of the army also. The refugees that arrived at the beginning of September, but also in October, they didn't know even the port that they will arrive. We can read in the newspaper of the period that there were ships in the port and they didn't take the permission to disembark the refugees. They have to find another port as in Piraeus, in Thessaloniki, in Volos, the biggest Greek ports, were full of refugees and the police, the state, couldn't manage to handle the situation. So the people that arrived, the majority of the people that they arrived in 1922, they didn't know when they start this journey, which will be their first stop. The majority of them first arrived in Mytilene and in Chios, in the islands of northern Aegean, very close to the border, and then they travel again to the mainland Greece. The people that they arrived after the Lausanne Treaty, the exchangeable refugees, the majority of them knew from the beginning where they have to go, as also the Muslims left their properties, their houses, their villages. There was a plan for these refugees where they will go. We have to mention here that the people that they arrive, they aren't allowed to move by themselves. They have to move all together in groups from one area to another. There is also this quarantine period that they have to stay in special places. And but even for of all these rules, the majority of them, they find a way to move by themselves, to try in trying to find their families, their relatives, because also this is a very important issue. The most of the refugees of the first period, during this journey, this trip, they have lost their families. They didn't know if they survived, if they managed to travel.
Okay. Thank you for that, Eleni. The questions are coming in thick and fast. I'm sure we're going to have a long discussion. We've got a question here from Spidula. When the refugees arrived, were they given citizenship upon arrival, or citizenship took a while? Or just another expanding on that question, when did they go on the electoral rolls? You know what I mean? Was there a waiting process? When were they given citizenship?
The Treaty of Lausanne in January of 1923 give to all the immigrants that they arrive from the Ottoman Empire the Greek citizenship. And they give the citizenships to all the immigrants that they arrived from Ottoman Empire from 1916 until 1924, the year that they hope that the exchange of population will complete. So at the end of 1923, we can say that all the refugees are Greek citizens.
Okay, so it was basically instantaneous or automatic if they arrived before.
It's a very quick process. It's a very complicated how it happens in a practical level, because most of these people, they don't have papers, they don't have a passport, they travel through the fray in Greece with the Greek army in a very strange and difficult conditions. But probably they need two people that they sign for them, that they are Eleni Kyramargiou or Nick Dallas, and there are refugees from Asia Minor or Pontus, but they are allowed to take the Greek citizenship very quickly.
Very quickly. Okay, as I said, we've got a few questions here. There's one from Terry Stavridis, who's also a researcher. How did the Great Depression of the 1930s impact the refugees in Coquinha? So there was that turbulent decade of the 20s, and then in 1930 we had the start of the global depression. How did that impact the refugees in the Coquinha suburb?
The Great Depression at the end of the decade of 1920s create a very difficult situation in the in the urban refugee settlements, as this all this manufacture of carpets, of all the other manufacture worked with refugees, and the market that they sell their products in a way all this market closed in a way. All these carpets from Greek, from a refugee manufacturer sent to the States. This market closed during the Great Depression. So at the end of 1920s or in the beginning of the 30s, the majority of this manufacture closed. I'm not sure how they, if and how they find a solution to all these
Economic
issues. Say, it's not. It isn't something that I research. There are some other colleagues that works with this issue. I know that it's a big issue. It was the Greek economy tried to find new solutions, new ways, to handle the situation, but it was a new difficult period for the refugees.
Okay, we have a question here from Stan Michailidis. Who funded the housing project? Was it government funds? Was it private enterprise? Was it international resources? How were the housing projects funded?
The first project of the fund of the Refugee Relief Fund, the fund raised towards charity fundraiser, bequest, donation and endowments of the Greek state. The project, the big project of the Refugee Rehabilitation Committee, funded by the two international loans that the Greek state took in 1924 and 1928.
Okay.
This is the great amount of money.
The biggest amount. Okay. I think we've got here more comment than the question, where Terry Savridis says that the Asian minor refugees, before they arrived, they had to quarantine on an island off Piraeus before they were allowed to land on Greek soil. So I take that as more as a comment. We have a question here from Nikos Papasiliadis. Can you expand on the difference in the allocation of property for refugees who were settled in rural areas as opposed to those in urban areas? So questions regarding property allocation. How was it allocated to those who settled in urban areas, and what was the different approach to those that were settled in rural areas? So the rural-urban difference, property allocation.
The majority of the refugees established in rural areas of Macedonia and Thrace, in the areas that the Muslims population used to live. There were two kinds of establishment. The refugees that established in the houses, and they took the land that the Muslims used to have, and also the Commission created new villages where refugees established, and also they tried to share all these Muslim lands and for work, to take rural land to agriculture. This is two main projects in for rural settlements of refugees, and the majority of them were of this project were in Macedonia and Thrace. In the urban settlements, we had only these four settlements in Νέα Κοκκινιά, in Βύρωνα, in Κεσαριανή, and in Νέα Philadelphia. The people paid for their houses, and after the exchange of population, they paid with all this, not the money, the contracts that they took during for the exchangeable fortune that they had in Asia Minor. And also the Commission sell some lands in these settlements to create and they give loans to create manufacturers. But these were, I think that there were something like 100 pieces of land, not something huge.
Got a question here from Elias Nikolabrandos. I'm going to sort of rephrase the question. How much needs of refugees were accommodated on the basis of their political affiliations? I suppose he's sort of asking, were some refugees given favorable or unfavorable treatment depending on their political affiliations?
I'm not sure that I understand the questions.
Well, the refugees came across to Greece, and some of them would have had some obvious political leanings towards either the Conservative or the Liberal parties. Was there sort of any favoritism shown on the basis of political affiliations?
The majority of the refugees, they support the party of Venizelos. And they didn't vote for the Conservative Party because they fear that the Conservative Party and the King were responsible for the Asia Minor catastrophe. During the decades, all this situation changed. The refugees participated in the Greek society. They were part of this society, and probably the new generation voted with other also for the Communist Party, for the Liberals, or for others during their memories, their beliefs. It's also a huge conversation in Greece about the refugee vote. I'm not the most. It's not an area of research that I'm very good on it. So I don't want to say more things. I feel that I'm not capable enough for this conversation.
Okay. Another question from Stan Michailidis. In the settlement of Kokkinia, do we have an idea of the percentage split between those who were from Asia Minor, Mikrasiatis, or those who were Pontian?
The majority of the people that they were in Νέα Κοκκινιά, they were from Asia Minor, not from Pontus.
Okay.
And also from Constantinople, from Istanbul.
The next question is in Greek from Kostas Stefanidis, so feel free to answer it in Greek. It's at the bottom of the private chat there, Eleni. Στις πρωτογενείς σας πηγές διαπιστώσετε αν υπήρξε συστηματική διασπορά των προσφύγων ανά την επικράτεια ή θεωρείτε πως έγινε τυχαία?
I think that the refugees, the state decided at the beginning where they will live. this came for not for the for the areas, for the peripheries, that they were enough space in a way, and also the Greek state decided to establish the majority of the refugees in Macedonia due to all this reason of the creation of the national borders, the fights that they used to have through the border. It's a period that we create, the state created in the form that we know at our time. And but every refugee family followed also a different and personal strategy. So the majority of the refugees, if even they established in an area, they had the opportunity sooner or later to move to another area by following their strategy and their decisions.
So there was a dimension mobility there.
Between
Yeah. Thank you, Eleni. We're on the hour, so we might bring this proceedings to a close. Thanks once again for participating in this year's seminar series, and today being the final one. Also, those who've been following us, next year, we haven't released the program yet, but we probably have a few more topics on Asia Minor in next year's program as well. Again, I encourage you all to take part in the film festival, attend some of the films showing in the next 2 weeks. It's a program now online, and also hope to see most of you at the Antipodes Festival on the weekend, the 22nd, 23rd. Thank you all for following the seminar series this year. We'll be back in March next year with more seminars and another impressive lineup as well. Bye, everyone.